Hey, I'm Tim Steamson, and this is a sampled instrument from outer space. A while ago, I found out that NASA had made all their audio recordings free under a Creative Commons license. And since the first sample pack I made just used recordings from the lamps around my house, I thought a good next step up from there for the second one would be to use the sounds from the furthest reaches of the observable universe. So I asked NASA if they'd be okay with me making an instrument out of their sounds, and Bert from NASA got back to me and he said that that would be fine as long as there was no human voices used. So after wondering how oddly specific that request was and searching for about 30 minutes for any non-human voices and not finding any at all, I got my favourite sounds from NASA's site and imported them into Logic for editing. Now, before we look at that, let's just talk about the GUI because I wanted to make this an experience where it was fun to look at as well as fun to play. So as well as having a load of sounds available for free, NASA also has a huge image and video library, and I managed to find this photo of one of their flight simulators. So using Photoshop, I cropped it, took out the displays, added in this little NASA sticker, and then created the names for all the sounds I wanted to use in that old sort of computer display style. I did the same for the effects controls. I knew I wanted an attack and release sliders and a volume slider. And then for additional effects, I decided on resolution, which would be a lo-fi effect, orbit, which would use a rotator effect, and space, which would be a reverb. Then just for fun, I added in this little classic Lego space minifigure. Just in case you're wondering, they don't have that on the actual flight simulator. And then using Knobman and Photoshop, I made these vintage computer display knobs and sliders. So let's have a look at each of the sounds and how they've been processed. This sound is data transmitted from the InSight Lander's seismometer caused by wind moving over the solar panels. And if you're not listening to this through speakers or headphones, you probably won't be able to hear it. I used Soundtoy's decapitator and radiator to add some saturation to this, and then used Filter Freak to really bring out the sub frequencies of this sound. So this became the sub rumble sound on the instrument, and it gives you that kind of part of the pad which you feel rather than hear. The InSight Lander's on Mars, by the way, so this is Martian wind you're hearing. This sound is a recording of a magnitude 3.7 Mars quake from the InSight Lander's seismometer. I've added some EQ to define a note, and then I've added a moving filter just to give it a bit of dynamic interest. So this sound became solar hum, and it has this kind of sound when you spread it across the keyboard. This is the sound of Sophia, or the Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy, taking off, and it's basically a really big plane carrying a really big telescope. So this immediately sounded like a guitar to me, and I've tried to shape it into that sort of sound by adding a compressor and then trying to use EQ to pick out a defined note. I've then put it through an amp plugin just to kind of emphasize that guitar-ness and done a bit more EQing so it doesn't muddy up the pad too much. So this sound became takeoff guitar, and here's what it sounds like as part of the pad. This sound is the vibrations from the wind on Mars that have been picked up by InSight's sensors. And I wanted to make sure this was different to the solar hum sound we had before. So I tried a lot of EQ on this and settled with this higher pitch, and then used FabFilters Pro R to really emphasize that note with some reverb. And this sound became Mars Winds. Here it is. So this is the recording of the sound created by the InSight Lander's robotic arm. I started out with some reverb to make it sound more pad-like and less mechanical, and then got rid of the frequencies that would get in the way once we pitch shifted it. So this sound became Sun Sonar, and here's how it sounds in the instrument. So this next sound isn't space popcorn, it's a recording of NASA's Stardust space probe passing the comet Tempel 1. I've used EQ to highlight a specific pitch here, and then added a bit of grit using Decapitator again. So this sound became Star Tap Dance, and I'm playing around with the reverb a bit here as well. This next sound is radio waves within Earth's magnetosphere picked up by the Emphasis satellite. I've denoised this using RX because it was a really noisy recording. And then I've tried to isolate a pitch using EQ here, kind of focusing on that top note that it's sliding up to. And then I've added a compressor just because there's a lot of dynamic contrast between the different chirps. And then finally we added a bit of echo just to kind of make it like it's space birds and space trees or something. And I also layered this one too, so you've got a few different parts of the recording happening at once. And here's how it sounds in context. It's quite a fun one to just hold down and listen to the different chirps interact. This next sound is the light curve wave given off by a Kepler star and converted to sound. It sounded quite synthy, so I wanted to try and pick out the tone in there, and I ended up with a few different EQs to try and shape that sound. And then I added a lot of distortion using Double Lock, and discovered that if I put it through Echo Boy's tape saturator, it gives me this really kind of raspy sound. So that sound became Kepler Creek, and I like to think of it as some kind of sort of space cello. This next sound is a different Kepler star's light waves converted to sound waves, and I wanted to make a percussive loop with this, so I experimented with a few loop points until I found one that worked. And then I just used some EQ to emphasize a particular pitch. I tempo synced it in Kontakt as well, so here's how it sounds as Kepler code. There's another version of this sound called Kepler Siren, which is just the same sound but tuned up a lot more and not tempo synced. Alright, this next sounds very famous. This is the Sputnik satellite beep, and I was very excited about using this. I used RX to get rid of all the noise on the recording, and then I used FabFilter Pro Q to just further isolate that single tone. This one's tempo synced as well, so you can get some cool arpeggiated effects if you play it as a broken chord. These are radio waves from Saturn, kind of like Earth's Northern Lights. I've used EQ to pick out this particular pitch, and then I've added some play reverb just to smooth out the sound a bit. I've then warped that sound a bit more using Soundtoy's Primal Tap Delay, and then just done a final EQ to shape that sound a bit more. So here's what that sounds like as Saturn Scream as part of the instrument. So here's some more of Saturn's radio waves picked up by the Cassini spacecraft. I've used EQ to try and isolate the tonal parts of this sound, and then added a little bit of delay using Soundtoy's Echo Boy. I've also had to cut this one up a bit and layer it so it'll loop a bit better, just because the sound as it was a bit tricky to make work. So this sound became Saturn Clangers because the kind of wobbly pitch element of it reminded me of the like the Clangers TV show, which I don't think I really watched, but I know what they sound like. This is more seismometer data from the InSight lander. I've EQ'd this to try and emphasize that underwater sort of feel, and I've tamed that just a bit using some tape saturation and a little bit of EQ. So this sound became Lumpy Space Bumps, which is my favorite name out of all the sounds, and here's what it sounds like. Here's another recording of Saturn's radio waves, picked up by the Cassini spacecraft. I've used EQ to isolate the most melodic part of this. I've pitched it up a little bit. I added some delay onto that as well, because I thought it sounded pretty good on it. And then I added some more EQ just to shape it and make it a bit less harsh. And this sound became Saturn Swoop. I was really close to calling it Mistrons, because it really reminded me of Captain Scarlet, if you ever watched that show. But I thought this sounded a bit better. And And that is it. I've created a demo of this on SoundCloud. It's there on Pianobook if you want to listen to that on there. It's using all the different sounds in here. And in that demo, I've also used audio Artemis's CO2 95%, which is another really great instrument which uses NASA's recordings if you want even more space sounds. I've also included a snapshot folder that you get in the download from Pianobook, and I'm going to do a separate video on how you install those in Kontakt as well. So that is a NASA space pad. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think below. It's available for free on pianobook.co.uk. And I don't know how this happened, but it's currently somehow the overall highest rated instrument on Pianobook. So thank you so much to everyone who's rated it and downloaded it and reviewed it. I have no words. You're amazing. And I've got no doubt that it'll get knocked off the top spot by something incredible very, very soon. So thank you again, Pianobook. I've decided to give my hardworking assistant a treat to celebrate. What's this? Well done.